get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today, and I appreciate all of our guests joining us for this discussion. Before we begin, please know I sincerely wish everyone is healthy and safe. My name's Jan Blaine, and I'm the Senior Director of Development in the College of Engineering. I've been with UGA Engineering for 2.5 years and serve as the head of fundraising and alumni relations efforts. To the supporters of our college and university, I want to offer my thanks for what you do. If you ever want to learn more about supporting UGA or its College of Engineering, feel free to contact me at my email, jblaine@uga.edu. I'll also share that at the chat box at the end. Engineering is the newest college at the University of Georgia with its inception in 2012. Prior to 2012, UGA offered agricultural and biological engineering degrees through the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. Since the formation of the college, we've added 6 additional degree programs in mechanical, environmental, civil, electrical, computer systems, and biochemical engineering, both at the bachelor's and master's level, as well as 12 Doctor of Philosophy programs. With nearly 2,500 students and over 80 faculty, we strive every day to achieve our mission of learning, discovery, and innovation. We also have a culture rooted in research, exemplified by the 6 centers and institutes housed in the college. One of these centers is our Engineering Education Transformations Institute, also fondly known as EDI. Serving as our keynote speaker today, Dr. Nicola Sochacka is the Associate Director for Research Initiation for EDI. EDI's mission is to transform engineering education through building social capital and shared capacity around the scholarship of teaching and learning in engineering. To achieve this mission, Dr. Sochacka works closely with faculty and students across our college to design and conduct research on cutting-edge approaches to educating the engineers of tomorrow. Supported by over $3.5 million in funding from the National Science Foundation, Dr. Sochacka's own research interests include fostering empathy in engineering, integrating the arts into STEM education, exploring novel approaches to qualitative and mixed methods educational research, and finding ways to attract more diverse populations to STEM fields. As Dr. Sochacka presents today, if you have a question, please submit it, and we'll do our best to answer your question at the end of her presentation. It is now my pleasure to hand it off to Dr. Sochacka for the presentation, and we look forward to the questions at the end. Dr. Sochacka, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jan. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. Well, it's really great to be here, and thank you to everyone who's participating in this Ask Me Anything session. As Jan said, I'm going to give a very short presentation, about 10 to 15 minutes, and then open it up for what I hope will be a whole bunch of questions. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge the National Science Foundation who is supporting the research that I'm going to talk about today. I also want to acknowledge a team of undergraduate students who have played and, well, in fact, are still playing a very central role in this research, specifically Christian Colotti, Jacob Hopkins, Shweta Veda, and Cozy Ofuni. So as Jan said, I'm the Associate Director for Research Initiation in the Engineering Education Transformations Institute, or EDI as we call it. So I've worked in engineering education doing research and teaching for just shy of 15 years. I did my undergraduate degree in environmental engineering at the University of Queensland in Australia. You may have picked up that I'm not from around here. I then worked as an engineer in Australia and in Sweden for 3 years before going back to UQ to do a PhD. I've been at UGA since 2010. Engineering education is a relatively new field and in some ways is still finding its feet. That's why I'm so excited to be at UGA, where I can confidently say that we are leading the nation in how to integrate insights from research into practice. You see, most places that do engineering education research, the Purdue's, the Virginia Tech's, Ohio State University, they have separate departments of engineering education. Here at UGA, our engineering education research faculty are fully integrated into our interdisciplinary technical schools, which means that our work doesn't just get published in papers, but gets put into practice immediately. Along these lines, the mission of our institute is to build a community of scholars, just like you can see on this slide. A community of scholars who are on the cutting edge of innovative teaching practices. We do this through organizing a whole range of different events, from FLCs to monthly forums to research incubators, all of which provide opportunities for our faculty to learn from each other and to learn from the latest cutting edge literature. Our integrated approach has allowed us to attract some of the very best faculty to our college. Many of my colleagues have commented to me that they came to UGA because of our strengths in engineering education. And it's this very community that made it possible for our college to respond in such an agile way to COVID-19. Back in March when we first locked down, and now as we are exploring high flex and hybrid approaches to teaching and learning. Right, so how are faculty and students experiencing the COVID-19 crisis? So what do you think? Mainly positive ways, mainly negative ways? When I asked that same question to about 300 participants in a webinar my colleagues and I gave in the spring to the American Society of Engineering Education, the overwhelming response was, well, negative, of course. But no, that wasn't the case for our college. When we first ran our survey in the spring, the majority of faculty reported positive experiences about adapting to online learning. You can see that here in the top right. So about 60% of faculty reported positive or extremely positive experiences. While the majority of student experiences were negative, also about 60%, you can see that here, we were able to learn from and leverage the positive experiences, so these ones. Put another way, the goal of our work was to identify and amplify positive experiences and find ways to lessen or dampen negative experiences. And this philosophy also aligns with one of EDI's key principles. That is, we seek to leverage the existing strengths of our college. When we work with faculty, this means that it's not our role to tell our colleagues how to teach, but to identify their strengths and build on them. That's exactly what we did in this research project. We set out to find out what was working and tried to build on that. So we collected data for this NSF-funded research project using a novel approach that's called SenseMaker. If you haven't heard of it, I strongly recommend that you Google it. So this is a really exciting research approach that has previously been used by companies like Pfizer to government entities like UN. In fact, it's been used all around the world. And if there are any alumni listening to this Ask Me Anything session and you're interested in finding out what's happening in your company, SenseMaker might be a tool to consider. So this approach enables us to capture the beat of the system, if you will. And it does that by asking respondents to tell us about a recent experience that they've had. The idea is that we can learn about a social system, like our College of Engineering, through the stories that are told by people in the system. Stories that they might tell their family or friends over a dinner table. We capture these stories by providing participants with a prompt as part of an online survey. That prompt looks like this. I'll just give you a chance to read this. So this very open-ended prompt enables the research to cast a very broad net, which lets us identify, like what I was saying before, which aspects of the system we want to amplify and which ones we want to dampen. Here is one of the positive stories we learned from students as part of the first round of this survey that we ran in April. So this story is in 3 parts. I'll bring up one at a time. So this student talks about how they really appreciated professors who asked students their opinions on how to run the course during the transition to online learning. So they noted that it was an uncommon approach to do this. but it also seemed like the logical thing to do. So from these and similar stories, we learned and communicated to the faculty in our college the importance of, now more than ever, involving students in the decision-making process. So after telling their story, respondents are asked to answer a series of questions about their experiences. And this provides the quantitative data for our study. So the stories provide the qualitative data, answers to these questions provide the quantitative data. So some of the questions look like this, which is called a triad. So participants think about their story and then think, okay, well, what was valued in this story was, and they move the dot to the place that best fits their story. SenseMaker studies include what are called dyads too, like this one. So dyads are purposefully designed to have very extreme answers on either side of the spectrum, and the ideal answer is in the middle. Our instrument included a prompt, 6 triads, like the one I just showed you, 2 dyads, and 8 multiple choice questions. And together, participant responses to these questions provide a rich body of qualitative and quantitative data. So this survey is distributed online. Using the SenseMaker data analysis platform, we are able to visualize these data to see higher level patterns and make recommendations. So for example, when we analyzed the triad I showed you a minute ago, we found that positive faculty experiences clustered around the willingness to experiment corner, where the green and light blue are positive and extremely positive experiences. Conversely, we found that student experiences tended to cluster around grit and perseverance, where the orange and dark blue dots are negative and extremely negative stories. We interpreted this pattern through comparing it to other dyads as faculty feeling like they had agency or control during the transition to online learning, while some students felt like they just had to grit their teeth and get through it. There are also more advanced visualizations that SenseMaker can provide, like this one, which is called a heat map. So this heat map, I'm going to try and not get too technical, but it comes from combining participant responses to 2 questions. A triad, which has struggle on one of the corners, and we took one of the corners from that triad, and mapped it against the dyad that I showed you earlier, which was people in positions of power treated people with praise or lack of respect. So here we can see a concentration of stories that participants rated as high struggle and low praise by those in power. So these stories were not ideal. These were stories of students and faculty struggling and feeling like people in positions of power weren't treating them with as much respect as they could. But we also saw another concentration of stories which had low struggle and high praise by people in power. So the question that we then asked ourselves is, how can we create more stories like are in the green circle and fewer stories like in the orange circle? To answer this question, we went through a collaborative process working with students and faculty of studying the stories that we could leverage, so the ones in the green circle. And I'm going to share one of these with you now. So this one is also from a student and also in 3 parts. So I'll give you a second to read this first part. So for alumni from engineering, this part of the story is probably very familiar to you, the grueling 2 to 3 hour exams. Giving exams was very challenging to do during the transition to online learning, and in fact is in the spring, and in fact is still challenging to do now. And so in this sense, the pandemic gave faculty an opportunity to think differently. And this student really appreciated the opportunity to choose how they could demonstrate that they achieved their learning objectives. So this is another part of the research that we're finding really exciting. So the pandemic has given us an opportunity to see other ways to do engineering education, ways that may not have become visible to us if this pandemic hadn't occurred. So far I've showed you 2 positive student stories, and of course there were negative stories too. So in these stories, students spoke about a sense of isolation, lack of flexibility on the part of some instructors, internet connection problems, and even COVID-19 cases in the family. I'm going to show you some examples of those negative stories. So here, this student talks about how tough it was not to have friends or faculty to speak to face-to-face, and how not having a dedicated schedule and location for their course, in some cases, found it quite difficult because the high expectations were still there. And here's one from a different student. So here we get a sense of the stress and the anxiety that many students felt. And some of that stress and anxiety stemmed from having to balance their responsibilities at home, whereas if they are at the university on campus, then a lot of those responsibilities, doing the washing up, doing the cleaning, weren't there. So I realize I've just showed you a taste, but I want to get to some of the recommendations that we made and some of the immediate actions that we took to amplify the strengths, the positive stories that were already happening, and to try and dampen some of the negative experiences that were occurring. So in the spring, as I showed you from that one triad, students felt like they had little agency or control over the transition to online learning. So we recommended to faculty, so we connected into that community, that dedicated community of faculty that we have built in our College of Engineering. We recommended giving students more choices into how they could meet their learning objectives, just like the 2 stories I showed earlier. So we also recommended to faculty that online courses involve more synchronous components. So at the time of the transition, there seemed to be a preference for asynchronous material, that is, learning that could be done in students' own time. So the main motivation for this was a good one. It was that internet connections aren't always reliable, and working from home can be challenging with lots of distractions. It can be hard to sit down at a specified time. Asynchronous learning for many faculty, it just made sense. The downside was that students and faculty lost that sense of connection. Our study helped to restore that sense of connection. And finally, another recommendation that we made out of a set of 3 reports that each had their own recommendations, one of the most important ones we made was the importance of flexibility and compassion. So we have published 3 reports so far, and all of those reports are available here. So this link is at our ED website. So this work is also ongoing. In fact, we have our 4th survey out at the moment that will close in 2 weeks. So now that I've given a very brief overview of the work that we're doing, I'd love to answer any questions that you have, and I'd absolutely like to thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Sochacka. We're proud of the work that you and your colleagues are doing on behalf of the college, and we have about 20 or so minutes for Q&A, so we're going to open those up, so please feel free to submit those. Pulling that up now. So first question, Nikki, what was, when you began this project, which through generous grant funding from the NSF, what was one of the biggest challenges you and your colleagues from a research perspective saw, or a barrier beginning the whole effort?
Yeah, so one of the biggest barriers was one that the NSF program officer actually also raised with us, and that was, how are you going to get participants to respond when everyone is panicking? Faculty are trying to, rejig their courses to put them online. Students are panicking, and And at least on the faculty side, we were able to confidently say to our program officer, and this is actually what happened in practice, that we have a really strong community of faculty in our college, and we know that they're going to be interested in sharing their experiences and doing everything that they can to improve how everyone is coping with this transition. And that did play out. We had a quite high response rate from faculty. Students were a little bit more challenging, but we did certainly get enough responses to start drawing some conclusions and be able to be quite timely in our recommendations in sharing our findings with faculty. But yeah, that was certainly a challenge.
Yeah. A more general question to kind of pivot from the presentation itself, but when not focused on how faculty and students are adapting to COVID, ED is involved in several other, high impact research with our students. In short, given the climate and the things that recent events that have happened in our country, diversity and inclusion is one of the things that y'all have been very focused on. Engineering traditionally has not been the most diverse field. I know it's kind of hard to say in a general statement, how are you impacting diversity, but is there something specific you could speak on that y'all, and I say y'all, your colleagues at ED are working on to, have an impact on diversity within the field of engineering at UGA or in general?
Yeah, I think that, so we recently hired a faculty member, Dr. Rashida Lewis, and one of her areas of research is focused on diversity in engineering, and her and the chair of the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, Dr. Fred Bayet, are working hard on a project to bring more underrepresented students to electrical and computer engineering. And our dean is really committed to making really smart hires to make sure that we have the faculty to focus on these areas. And Fred Bayet, who's the chair of the electrical and computer engineering, it was great that he could, put his passion to work with Rashida when she came. The Institute also works with a lot of undergraduate student researchers, and we purposefully try and work with underrepresented students. We also have a lot of underrepresented students that approach us, and so we have some very meaningful relationships with those students. And I think another thing that we're doing, so I do research on empathy in engineering, and so I think it's really important, especially for women, to realize that empathy is really a socio-technical profession that involves a lot of working with other people. And I think that also, bringing that into our undergraduate program, makes the program seem a little bit more accessible to a broader range of people. And I don't want to just say women, because there are plenty of male students as well who really appreciate that social side of the socio-technical profession. And so we work hard to keep that balance in our undergraduate program.
Well, I think it's a very valuable point. My colleagues and I, speaking to people, industry leaders, gone are the days that a graduate can come in and just know the theoretical. Now you need to be HR compliant, know how to manage cross generations, diversity and inclusion initiatives. These are things that are expected from day one for our graduates. So very valuable work.
And I'll just add to that ED, so our institute also runs monthly forums, and we've been getting a lot of really great people in. We had one of the leaders in the National Society for Black Engineers come and give us a presentation and about how to be more inclusive in the classroom, everything from having different looking people on our slides, and it's been really great to see how our community is just you're really yearning for that information. Like, people are asking for that, and we're just trying to do our best to bring in people to download that information so people can take advantage of it. But yeah, the great thing is that our faculty, they want to be more inclusive, and they're trying to find as many ways as possible to do that.
We did have a question on the diversity and inclusion topic from Nuria. They asked, following up on the recent question, have you seen any differences in terms of how underrepresented students are responding to online learning? We are seeing in the literature that online learning can be a way to avoid be a way of avoiding microaggressions, and some students are starting to use it as a conscious strategy.
Yes, we have seen some really interesting patterns in our data. One story that really struck us very early on was from a student who described themselves as differently abled. And they pointed out that the transition to online learning for them was actually a relief, because it meant that they didn't have to struggle to get to class. They could participate in ways that they hadn't been able to participate before. And so this is this is another opportunity that we've raised with the Dean, that the pandemic has shown us, how can we make our college more fully accessible to a broader range of students, regardless of whether or not there's a pandemic. We have also seen more cases of African-American students being directly impacted by COVID-19, either friends or family or church members. That has been something that has certainly come out. There are some disparities. I wouldn't say that I can go fine-grained enough yet about whether it affects different groups of students, but there certainly are some students that have a lot of difficulties with internet connections at home, a lot of students that have difficulties with younger brothers and sisters at home, whereas other students who have older brothers and sisters, it's quite easy for them. So it's, yeah, online learning has really revealed that the diversity of experiences that different students have, some of which map to underrepresentation, is quite vast.
Thank you, Nikki. We had a question from Athens local Christy Dasher. She asked, are your findings being shared to other schools and colleges across the university platform?
So we have shared all of our findings are publicly available on our ED website, the one that I shared with you earlier, and I'm sure that we can send that out to everyone who's participated in this Ask Me Anything session. We send out our results to all students, all staff, all faculty, so that's part of the transparent nature of our research. I know that some associate deans have passed on some of the interim reports to different places in the university. The reports have been shared and very well received with the National Science Foundation. The reports have also been shared with the American Society for Engineering Education. So I think I mentioned that we ran a webinar in the spring with 300 participants. So they have been shared quite broadly, but we haven't purposefully reached out, for example, to Franklin College or to the Terry Business School. We haven't purposely reached out to those entities on campus, but I mean, we'd certainly be more than happy to share what we're doing.
Thank you. Diana Fontaine asks, does this research gather information about engineering students' experiences over the summer in regards to co-ops and internships that may have been canceled? And then to end the question, are there any ways that faculty have helped bridge the gap for students going into their third and fourth years? So kind of two questions.
Yeah, so in terms of the internships, so we ran 2 rounds of the survey in the spring. And some of the stories did mention internships that had been canceled. And so that was certainly a theme that came up. We decided, we ran the survey in the summer, but only for faculty. We are trying to be careful not to over survey students. And so we didn't capture, we only captured what students had heard about their internships in the spring, but we didn't purposefully survey over the summer. We sort of wanted to save that goodwill for the survey that we've sent out now. That said, it may have been a missed opportunity. I'm not sure. In terms of the question, how are faculty helping students transition to third and fourth year? Was that the question, Jan?
Yeah, are there any ways that faculty have helped bridge the gap for students going into their third and fourth years?
I'm maybe I'm not fully aware of the gap that person is talking about. The gap is in their more technical courses.
That's fair. I'll leave it out there. Diana, if you want to elaborate on
Yeah.
that question, please resubmit and we'll dive into it again. Nikki, one other facet that I think is unique about what y'all are doing that I think the audience would appreciate. Not every school of engineering, college of engineering in the country focuses on this type of research. Could you share a little bit about, maybe how, to your knowledge, how many engineering education, schools or, centers or research focus are in the country, just to kind of highlight the uniqueness of what y'all are doing?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two different ways. So in terms of using this instrument, SenseMaker, which is for higher education, a very novel way to understand what's happening in a college or in a school or in a university. And it was first introduced to me and maybe 30 other people at a special invited workshop at the National Science Foundation 2 years ago. And UGA is the only school, UGA is the only university that has really run with this approach. And so we are one of the first in the nation. I think we are the first in the nation to get support from the National Science Foundation to do this kind of work. When my students and I presented a paper on this work at the American Society for Engineering Education, it was the first paper that had ever been published on SenseMaker. And SenseMaker, I mean, I could talk for hours about this approach. My background is in qualitative research, but this is such a powerful methodology because it has the richness of people's stories with that quantitative data attached to it. So it really works at scale. And so we are the only college of engineering or the only college in any discipline in higher education that I know of that is using this approach. I know that a lot more, I've had a lot of inquiries after our presentation at the American Society of Engineering Education in the spring. And so I think it's something that's set to explode, but we're definitely leading the way in this. And in terms of what we do as an institute at UGA, like I was saying earlier, most other universities across the country are doing fantastic foundational engineering educational research, but in a physically separated school or department. And at UGA, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have those expertise really embedded and alongside our technical faculty. There's one other university, I don't remember if it's Michigan State or the University of Michigan, one other university in the country is doing that. And so, yeah, we just think it makes sense. I mean, why be physically separated when you can work along side by side and learn from people who, I teach engineering learn from my colleagues. It just makes sense.
Well, congrats on y'all's successes with NSF and the ecosystem y'all created among the faculty and staff is really impressive. I enjoy attending y'all's events. We did get some clarity to Diana Fontaine's question. She was speaking to the gap for students that did have a co-op or internship canceled.
Yeah.
For those third and fourth years, what have the faculty been able to do to possibly help them in that missed opportunity?
Yeah. So our dean, Don Leo, he has done a lot of, he learned quite early on that this was a challenge that was being faced by many of our undergraduate students. And so he worked hard to find other opportunities. And I know that the college hired quite a number of students over the summer to work directly with faculty to help faculty transition their courses to either online or a high flex hybrid model. And so that certainly filled the gap for quite a few of those students. I know that many of the students that I work with as undergraduate researchers, their internships transition to online. But yeah, the college did make opportunities available. Jan, maybe were there other opportunities that I know the dean had that big task force of undergraduate students that he matched with faculty.
Yeah, we were fortunate to utilize students that were in the need of work to help with some initiatives within the college. In addition to that, I'll give a plug to one of my colleagues, Kelly Saucy, was very hands-on on this and, gathering that data and those students. Yes, it's important to know the numbers, but also to Nikki's presentation, the empathy part, not just leaving them high and dry. So the college did a lot of efforts trying to make other connections. We also had many success stories of internships, co-ops that didn't get canceled that went virtual, but turned out to be quite fruitful. And so it's, and there'll be a story coming out soon about 3 students that did virtual internships with NASA that were highly praised. So there were good, those things happen, but I think we were able to rebound the best we could under the circumstance.
I'm really glad you mentioned Kelly's work because some of my undergraduate student researchers were telling me about the emails that she was sending out, sharing as many opportunities as she could for online internship possibilities. So yeah, they really appreciated that.
That's great. It's good feedback. More to come. Nikki, we'll end on this. Since we're, Ask Me Anything through the Alumni Association, we're speaking to some UGA alumni. So for those that are an alum that are interested in this, but they don't know how to potentially partner or have a follow-up discussion with Edie, how do y'all work with, company stakeholders, alumni that might be interested in, supporting or partnering? What is your best recommendation on, next steps? And that's a generic question, but,
Yeah. We're always interested in speaking to alumni to hear what it's like to work as an engineer. I mean, I have worked as an engineer, but when you teach in front of a classroom, that doesn't seem to count sometimes. And so it's always wonderful for alumni to come into the classroom. And now it seems to be even easier because it doesn't have to be physically in the classroom. It can be on Zoom to talk about how important it is to, get on with your teammates and to know how to ask for a raise and to know how to look at a complex problem. And so I think that reaching out to me or my colleagues, or I'm sure that many people, not just the engineering education research faculty. I mean, lots of people in our college teach leadership, entrepreneurship. Reaching out to me, or I'm sure Jan, you could point them in our directions. That would be the beginning of a conversation, and then I think there are lots of other ways to be involved as well. I mean, our work on empathy, we've been throwing around some ideas about connecting with some companies as well, and so that might also be a possibility. I guess I would just encourage you, get in contact, share with us what your experiences are, or if you want to learn about SenseMaker to do a SenseMaker survey in your company, also reach out.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So we are out of questions and we're kind of pushing the time as well. So I was gonna wrap us up. Nikki, is there anything at the end you want to share before I close us out?
Just going back to our conversation beforehand, just really looking forward to finding out what's going to happen with the football in the fall and just keeping an eye out on that.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot goes into that. So, well, Dr. Sochacka, thanks so much for presenting today and for the work you are doing in the field of engineering education at UGA. In my job, I get to visit with leaders in the field of engineering often, and the work that Nikki and her colleagues are doing to enhance engineering education is very applicable to the field of engineering today. And it's, I truly believe, going to help our students be industry-ready engineers and early leaders in their craft. To find out more about supporting UGA engineering or learning more about ED and potential partnership there, you can always contact us. My email and the web info will go into the chat box, so feel free to reach there. also a simple Google search away. And then, to close us out, today's session was a part of the Ask Me Anything series presented by the UGA Alumni Association. To learn more or sign up for future series, please visit alumni.uga.edu. And I'll end on this as I end on all my emails. Please stay healthy, stay safe, and let's go Dogs.